fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCOW 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, Mr. Joe Goldberg. How are you doing?
I am here. I'm enjoying a day in the suburbs of Chicago where there's not a bit of snow on the ground in February. I'll take it.
But you've been drinking already, so...
Shh. Secrets.
Okay. Well, it's a big day today. Oh, and also, don't forget, everybody, I will be on Talk TV on Sky in the UK tomorrow at 12 Pacific time, 8 London time. It's exciting about my Hannibal the Cannibal book because Richard Maudsley is now the longest person in history. I didn't know they had a record, but there's a world record for he's been in solitary confinement longer than anybody else ever.
Wow.
16,400 days now. So the next time,
I'm speechless for that one.
Yeah. Next time you're bored and tired and feeling lonely, just remember that. It could be worse.
Calendar.
Yeah, could be worse. Well, anyway, now today, great book coming up, and we both listened to it because we're too old to read. So now the book is called The Nazi Conspiracy, and of course it's by Brad Meltzer. So thanks for being here, Brad.
Good to be here. I'm glad you're drinking.
Well, I don't know. You get too much, I won't be able to say the right thing here, But
everybody has a hobby.
Yeah. So let's start out with the book. Now this is a great book. We both liked it a lot. So why did you write the book? Like what was it behind it that made you go into this book and actually write it?
So the book is called The Nazi Conspiracy. It's about a secret plot to kill FDR and Stalin and Churchill at the height of World War II. And the truth is it was a cool story, right? Like that's just a cool story. It's a piece of history that most people have never heard. I certainly hadn't heard it. I found it in a quick mention that was like page long story and just was like, is this true? Is this internet nonsense? What is it? But, the fun of the story and the fun of any story to me is then Josh mentioned, I'm my co-author, we always have this moment where we ask the bigger questions. So, and again, we did the first conspiracy about the secret plot to kill George Washington. We did the Lincoln conspiracy, the plot to kill Lincoln long before John Wilkes Booth, the original plot to kill him at the beginning of his presidency. And even here, the Nazi conspiracy, each time we ask one question, which is, what are we really writing this for? Like, what's it really about? Not just the titillating part of like, oh, they're going to kill, FDR and Stalin and Churchill. And for us, it was, looking around at the culture where we are right now. And when you see Nazis marching a couple of years ago in Charlottesville, when you see Kanye West shooting his mouth off, saying anti-Semitic things, we all wring our hands and we all go, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is how could this possibly happen here in America? It feels like something that should be happening in Europe back in the 40s or something. And then we looked and we saw that back in the beginning of World War II, there was a Nazi rally held in Madison Square Garden in the heart of New York City. 20,000 people gathering together and cheering, big giant banner of George Washington surrounded by swastikas. And the first speaker at the rally says if George Washington were alive today, he'd be friends with Adolf Hitler. And why are we fighting Nazis in 2023? Because they never left. And that's why we're writing the book. Like, that's what Josh and I, the whole time we were writing, we were like, that even though we may not see those words, like, studying history is not just interesting because cool old things are cool. Like, it's interesting because it tells us and informs us about something where we are today, and we hopefully evolve and learn. And so, yeah, you have Kanye West shoot his mouth. That's nothing new. Back then it was Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford using their celebrity to be anti-Semitic. And so To me, the Civil War never ended. World War II never ended. When you beat the bad guys, you don't just go, oh, I'm going to be a good guy now. No, they're still there, and we're still fighting them. And so that, to me, is what, when we sat down with the book, we were like, we want that to permeate from the book. Look at that.
Well, it certainly did. I was one of those that was lulled into a sense of the worst wars are over, after the 80s and stuff. When we get into the 90s, for some reason, I thought, all this anti-Jewish and all this stuff that's going on was gone. But, the thing is, it never does go away. It just it's how much attention and how much power they get. But that sort of reminded me, that whole, the Nazi rally in New York reminds me of, I hate to say it, but like a Trump rally.
Well, that's, here's the thing is like, everyone looks at history and sees whatever portion and mirror they want to see. But there is no question that there is a recipe for authoritarianism, right? There's a recipe, and it takes, Adolf Hitler back in World War II, he basically identifies these white native-born Germans and who are suffering economically. And then Hitler says those magic words. He says to those Germans, those people are responsible for your problems, those people. And that's a code. And we know that, of course, he means the Jewish people back then. But look through history. Sometimes it's the black community or the gay community, the immigrant community, pick your minority community. And it's over and over the same thing. It's what you see in Russia right now, in the Ukraine, what Putin's doing. And like you said, I mean, the Holocaust doesn't start with death camps. It starts with slogans and rallies and propaganda and book bans. And if that story sounds familiar to you, it should.
Well, in your book, you've got Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin, for better or for worse, three strong leaders who rallied together for the common cause of just getting rid of fascism. So are there equivalent today? What does it take? What are the themes from your book that go to today that resonate in the, how do you stop that? They went to war.
Yeah, I mean, but even what you just said, right? It's not, we tell the story in World War II that, we punched the Nazis in the jaw and we saved the day for democracy, and, America did the right thing, and wasn't it great? And it's a great story, like you said, where it stood against fascism. It's a great story, but that's just, we're given the highlight reel. No one in America wanted to fight Nazis. We tell that story like we're the brave superheroes, but no one wanted to. World War I happened. We lost so many people fighting in that war. No one wanted to go to another fight in Europe. We were isolationists. We wanted no part there. And then what happened? Pearl Harbor happens, and we're pissed, right? And we're like, we're declaring war on those Japanese. They just bombed us here in America. And even then, no one wants to fight Nazis. We don't declare war against Germany. We just say we're going to take on the Japanese because they bombed us. Hitler is doing what he does. We're going to go after these Japanese. And the only reason we start fighting Nazis is because Adolf Hitler is a fool. Adolf Hitler miscalculates a few times greatly, during the war. One is he, of course, thinks that the Soviet Union will fall quickly and won't fight, which, of course, they're going to fight to the death and they're never going to stop. And one of his other great miscalculations is when he finds out what happens in Pearl Harbor, his own men tell him, listen, boss, lay low. Lay low. You don't need to pick a fight with the United States. Let them fight with Japan. We'll fight with, we'll fight Europe, and it'll be, that's more evenly matched. And Hitler slapped his leg in delight, as you see when you read the Nazi conspiracy. And he's basically like, this is great. What an opportunity. Only a coward, strong people don't wait to have war declared on him. Strong people declare war themselves. And he picks a fight with America, declares war on us first. And Winston Churchill remembers this quote about America, that when it comes to America, America is like a giant, like kettle, and when you light a fire under it, there's no lack of power that it's going to produce. It is just going to keep producing power. And Winston Churchill is absolutely right. And I say all that simply to answer your question, which is, how do we do these things? I wish I could say, people just have enough or they do this. It's when it's in their own self-interest and they realize how bad it gets is when we fight back sometimes. And I think we have to understand that and tell the more complex stories so that we can be better people. So we do look back and don't tell a story where we're just like, oh, we saved the world from fascism. Like, sure we did, but wouldn't it have been better if we stopped the Holocaust from happening and entered earlier? Wouldn't it be better if it didn't take all that for us to do the right thing? And I know it's complex stuff, right? I'm not saying, rush into every skirmish that takes place outside the United States, but we have to, I think, be more informed, and in terms of, telling these stories of history in a more complex way, because we reduce Stalin and Churchill and FDR into these, wonderful icons. But Joseph Stalin is on the Allied side during World War II, but he doesn't start the war there. He's actually on the Nazi side. The only reason he switches sides is the Nazis invade the Soviet Union. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to get my ass kicked. I'm going to go be on the Allies now. He's not a good guy. But we, again, tell those stories of those three brave men standing up against fascism. So to me, I think you got to, I wish I could say it was so easy, but the reason we study World War II and we all love it is because it's one of the few times in history where everyone agrees the United States jumped in, they knew who the bad guys were, they did the right thing, they saved the day, and everyone agrees. When is the last time you could say that about the American government?
A good answer. So it leads me to ask, in the book, you have a lot of research, a lot of pieces. You've got Soviet Russian pieces, you got Britain, you got the U.S., you've got everybody else. How did you pick the pieces you needed to put together to make those themes relevant from then to today? What was your decision-making process? Yeah,
and, full credit to Josh Bench. He's, my co-writer on this book. He's an award-winning documentarian and one of the best researchers I know. And when we did the Washington book and the Abraham Lincoln book, we go to the National Archives, you go to the New York Historical Society, places that are very obvious and have lots of great records. And for this book, we're trying to tell you the secrets of the Nazis as they're trying to kill FDR and Churchill and Stalin. We're trying to figure out what the Nazis were doing in their records. Of course, many of them were destroyed. If you're trying to find out what the Soviet Union was doing at that time secretly, you're asking the KGB for their files. Guess who they don't want to give them to? So we had to hire people who speak Russian, people who speak German for our researchers, and we were on completely new ground here. And and I always think when it comes to kind of picking what the research and pulling it out is, it's like the Supreme Court definition of pornography, which is you know it when you see it. And when you have a good nugget, you just know it when you see it. I mean, the nugget I remember we had is, just to paint the picture, it's 1943. The big three are meeting for the very first time in Tehran, Iran, of all places. This is the moment they're going to look each other in the eye for the very first time, decide how they're going to take on the Nazis, decide on troop movements, on morale, on supplies. This is the moment. And FDR flies, and takes a boat across the world. He's in Tehran. The motorcade is coming down the center of the city. And everyone is, of course, looking and waving to see the president. They want to see the president that's moved across the globe to be here. And the president's waving back from the motorcade. But what no one knows is that's not the president in the motorcade. It's a Secret Service decoy. The real president, the real FDR, is across town on the other side of the city, ducked down and hiding in the back of a beat-up sedan because they're worried that Nazi assassins are about to murder him. Now, I just ruined chapter 1 of the Nazi conspiracy for you.
Yeah, well done.
Right? But that's chapter 1, so it's okay. But the truth is you get that story and you're like, oh, there's our beginning. You just know it when you see it.
Why was it so important that the three actually met in person? Is it more a signal to the world that they were together, or because couldn't they have decided a lot over telecommunications?
Yeah, and they did. They did do that a lot. I mean, there was a famous meeting in Casablanca where, so to answer your first part, one, it does matter. Appearances did matter. Now when news comes out, whatever news comes out of the White House, right? Whether you like this White House or like the old one or whatever one you like, when it comes out, half the country goes, that's BS. Whatever they say, we say that's BS. I don't believe that. But back then, when we had editors on things and we didn't just have Twitter accounts, that perception was reality. So when FDR and Churchill meet and have their big summit in Casablanca in Morocco, every newspaper in the world shows them sitting together and shows the united front of the Allies. And that perception is reality. We are a united front We will have unconditional surrender from our enemies, and the winner take all. Winner decides what you don't get to negotiate your peace treaty. The winner decides. That was a huge moment in history. So part of it's that, but the bigger part of it was they couldn't actually agree on basically to what becomes the invasion of Normandy. Stalin is the one who's asking for that for years. He's like, listen, I need you to invade continental Europe. He's getting decimated in the Soviet Union when the Nazis invade. He needs help. We're sending munitions, we're sending weapons, but we are not fighting there. We are actually down south by Italy, and all of our fighting is happening there. And Stalin's like, come invade the East. Do what basically becomes the invasion of Normandy. But they couldn't get Churchill to agree to it. Churchill kept putting it off. Even FDR in the beginning put it off. He didn't think we had the weapons. He didn't think we had the men. We didn't think we had the organization. So getting everyone in that one room was their way of trying to get everyone on the same page. It was the one thing they just really couldn't agree on. And the only way it was going to happen is if FDR really helped it happen, because FDR was in the middle because Churchill and Stalin hated each other. And FDR, when you look, we've done a book, as I said, on Washington and Lincoln. Now here's FDR and Churchill. When you study what makes a great leader in history, or even just what makes a great president, it's not who makes the best speeches. It's not who makes the biggest promises. It's who, at a moment in time when a disaster happens, can pivot and adapt and bring us together. And the one thing, people will argue, I can't even believe it's controversial. People still think it's controversial, FDR's progressive programs that he goes. But the one thing that everyone agrees on who studies World War II is that if FDR had one thing that he did right, it was managing all those egos. The thing he believed in more than anything was his own ability to charm everyone. And he charmed Stalin because he's like, says to Churchill, Stalin likes me way more than you, so I'm going to talk to him. And then he charms Churchill. Of course, they have a famous friendship. And that ability to charm and bring everyone together is really what makes so much of the end of the war happen. He's the right person in the right place at the right time.
Well, I think and we all know the names Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, whether you know a lot about them or not, and you have them in the book, they're your main characters in your subtitle. But what I find that you do well, and I Washington Conspiracy, I've done them all, is you bring out the people, the other people, the Scorzanis and the other ones that make this stuff for good or bad tick. How do you do that? Why do you do that? How do you piece those people together? Which ones are the important ones? All those questions.
Yeah, listen, you're talking about, that's my favorite part of the book, right? My favorite part is not telling the story you've already heard, but showing you all the things you don't know about this moment in time. So you just mentioned my favorite character, he's a horrible person, but an incredible person to watch, is Otto Skorzeny, who's a Nazi who in World War II is a special ops guy. And he gets notified one day that he's summoned to come to Adolf Hitler's private headquarters called the Wolf's Lair. And if you're getting paid to go to the Wolf's Lair, this is not it's not a kid's birthday party there, right? Like, it's serious stuff. And he goes down to the Wolf's Lair, and what he realizes is that Adolf Hitler has invited all of his best special ops guys, and he wants to find who the best one is. And he lines them up in a room shoulder to shoulder, and he quizzes them with one key question. Adolf Hitler says, "What do you think of Italy?" And all of them start giving these kind of butt-kissing answers of like, "Oh, Italy's on our side in the war, and we're going to fight with them to the death forever. We're unified." And Otto Skorzeny, this one Nazi, shouts above everybody else, "I am from Austria, my Führer." And it's a gamble by him because he knows Adolf Hitler's from Austria. And he also knows that a true Austrian forever resents Italy. Because back in the First World War, Italy took a key piece of Austria and never gave it back. And in that moment, Adolf Hitler turns to this Nazi, Otto Skorzeny, and he's like, "You're my guy. You're my guy." And he sends Otto on a secret mission that is so crazy. I won't ruin it because it ruins a fun part of the book. You guys have both heard it. But that mission he goes on, when we knew, we were like, I didn't even know the story until we put it in the book.
Yes, me either. Let me interrupt. Yeah, I have a history degree and stuff. I totally had forgotten or did not know that story.
And it's such a crazy mission that Josh mentioned, my co-author, and I said to the editor, we need to put a photograph in the copy of the Nazi conspiracy because people will not believe this happened unless we show them physical proof that it happened. And you saw, you can't see if you didn't do the audiobook, like you'll see the actual picture of that moment. And it's bananas. And it's, the wildest Nazi story you've never heard in your life. And you'll see why he gets the nickname, the most dangerous man in Europe.
Pretty incredible story, I'll tell you. It's so interesting. How do we know that the actual plot existed? And the other thing behind that is, what do you think the real reasoning of the Nazi plot was? Was it really to kill Stalin and FDR, stuff like that, or was it about the bugging of the room?
First, you have to realize that assassination was just a real weapon in everyone's arsenal. So after Pearl Harbor happened, the architect of Pearl Harbor for the Japanese was an admiral named Admiral Hirohito. Okay? Admiral Yamamoto. And Admiral Yamamoto, eventually we tracked him down. The United States tracked him down. They found what plane he was going to be on. They found his flight plan. They said to FDR, you want to kill him? This guy's responsible for Pearl Harbor. You want to take him out? And FDR thought about it and famously said, get Yamamoto. Of course he did. And, we know the stories of Adolf Hitler. Everyone's heard those rumors and myths of how we tried to kill him on a train. They tried to, get him in the Alps and put a bomb on there. And, even Churchill, there was a moment where the Nazis thought that Winston Churchill was on a commercial airliner. And they shot the airliner out of the sky, killing everyone on board. And it wasn't Churchill. It was a guy who just looked like Churchill. Everyone died because he looked like Churchill. So assassination back then was a huge weapon of choice. So the big three being together is a tantalizing target for the Nazis. Now, the trick of the book, and you'll see when you read it, is obviously the plot gets thwarted. So we don't know what they were going to do, right? There's rumors that they're going to, sneak in through the underground tunnels, and there's rumors that they're going to do it on Winston Churchill's birthday because that's when they would all be together. But of course it never happened, so we don't know. And the one thing you also find is that the people who crack the code are actually the Soviet Union. They're the ones who figure out that there are people that are there to kind of kill FDR and Stalin and Churchill. But what you also find out, and again, I don't want to ruin this part, is they're also bugging FDR's room. So they've got microphones in the floor, microphones in the furniture, microphones in the carpet, and you'll see the whole analysis on why we believe what we believe. I don't want to ruin the whole book, but one of two things happen. Either one, there is this plot to kill FDR, Stalin, and Churchill, or Joseph Stalin pulled one of the greatest scams in all of world history and fooled Winston Churchill and FDR and arguably single-handedly changed the course of World War II. Whatever side you pick, that is an incredible story worth telling. And you'll see all the evidence on both sides, and you'll see what we believe in there. But, I was like, how do you not tell this story? Because, and the question you have to be asking yourself now is, why don't you know this story? Right? And the reason you don't know it is because when FDR comes back from meeting the big three, he comes back and he says, he has a press conference at the White House and he says, yeah, the meeting went well. And by the way, the Nazis tried to kill us. And the phone starts ringing and the Secret Service is like, oh my God, you shouldn't have said that. And everyone's like starting to write stories. But then guess what happens? Within that year, the invasion of Normandy happens, right? Thousands of men storming the beaches of Normandy, another 100,000 coming after that, 1 million, one of the greatest moments in American history is that invasion. And when Normandy happens, guess what? This story of the plot to kill the big three becomes a footnote. And it just gets lost because it's not the big story anymore. There's far bigger ones to tell. And so, we, of course, I love the footnotes. So when I found this story, I was like, you have to tell it. And we tell it. What I'm proud of is if you put FDR and Stalin and Churchill in the plot to kill them in the internet right now, you will find so much information about it, but so much of it is wrong. It's of all the things we've worked on, nothing has had more misinformation than this. And the reason is because of who's telling the story. Because, like you just said, tell us about what happened and whether the plot was real. One of the things that really interestingly happens is after World War II, it's the Soviet Union that saves the day. But as the 60s come and as the Cold War hits full storm, guess what happens? America doesn't want to tell stories where the Russians are the good guys anymore. We don't tell that story anymore. So the story about this plot itself shifts. And it's fascinating to me to watch it. So history is not math. There's not just one answer. History is based on lots of perspectives, and depending on whose perspective you pick, you get a different answer. And what I love about the Nazi conspiracy is you see everyone's point of view.
Well, you kind of blew up my next question, because I was going to, and you can reiterate, I can move on, is the last chapters are a discussion about historians and history. It's basically fact or fiction. And that is really fascinating. And that's why you felt the need to add that to enhance the story, let everybody know.
Yeah. I mean, for us, I think it was just about being completely, clear about, I just really despise, as someone who studied history, majored in history, I'm always like, there are people good historians will go out there, and say, this is definitively what happened that day. And unless you have full proof, which rarely do you have, then you don't know what happened that day. Nobody knows what happened that day because everyone there was dead. And to me, when you have conflicting reports, I think it's important to say, here's what someone else says, though, and here's why they say it. So we are very open and transparent. I believe in full transparency. When there are moments in the book I'm sure you listened to where you were like, where we say, we don't know. We don't know to this day how or what day the Nazis figured out that Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt were meeting. It's just gone. Nobody knows that piece of information. What we do know is that the most highest level secret intelligence of the Nazis used to be written down in what they called brown sheets, given that nickname because they were truly printed on brown paper. And those brown sheets were, they have big rules. You have to put them in a special case, and after 30 days you had to destroy them. It was like the Mission Impossible briefcase, but for Nazis. And we should never know any of those secrets. But the head of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, for the Nazis, used to keep extensive diaries. And as a result, he used to write what he read about in the brown sheets in his diaries. It was a completely stupid move for him, great for us. So we get our hands on the diaries, and now we know what was in them. And the one thing that was shocking to me is, like you said before, you asked a question about, why don't we just do things by cables? We all know the story of the Enigma machine and how we cracked the Nazi codes and saved the day for the war. What I didn't know is they cracked our codes. They had actually cracked the international cables that Churchill and FDR were using to speak to each other. And they knew exactly what we were doing. And that was chilling to me. And so I love at the end of that book when we can say, here's what we knew, here's how we knew it, here's what we don't know, and here's what no one's going to know. And it's an imperfect puzzle, but man, we got as many pieces as anyone has, and we're going to set the record straight.
Well, I was wondering about national heroes like Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford. How were they able to keep and maintain their popularity when the Nazis became who they were?
Yeah, man, I wish I knew the answer to that question. It's disgusting, right? I mean, I think part of it is because they were controlling Henry Ford he had his own newspaper. He had his own way. He didn't do everything out in the open like that, but he had his own newspaper, and he was rich and powerful. And we all complain about Twitter today, and we all complain about social media today. But the good part is back then everyone had it was controlled by a couple gatekeepers, and those who were really wealthy could buy silence of whole papers to keep things out. And the truth is, and I think it's just a hard truth, is people didn't care. People just didn't care that you hated the Jews. They just didn't. That's why you have the Bun rally in Madison Square Garden. That's why you have what happened, when you see Nazis marching in Illinois. Like, they just didn't care. There were just a lot of people who were anti-Semitic. Why was the whole country not up in arms over Kanye West? Some people were. Some people were like, whatever, that's him. He's being kooky. He's being crazy. So you're asking me to explain human nature, especially when someone's, mean to someone else. I can tell you my answer is, when we wrote this book, what is so vital to me is the American dream is not about making money. It's about using your voice. And when you see someone being picked on and you see someone being bullied, you use your voice, you speak up, and you say enough. And that, to me, is why we study World War II. That's, to me, what the Nazi conspiracy is really about, is about showing you what happens when you don't say it. The reason we singled out Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh is because we've kind of whitewashed them out of history. We just let them get away with it. We go buy our Fords and everything's great. And, if, we have all these great things and Henry Ford Museum is wonderful and has Rosa Parks' bus in Michigan. How about the fact that he's one of the biggest anti-Semites of all time? Why are we not talking about that? Like, you don't just get a pass because you did some good stuff too. Like, and again, I do not like cancel culture. I do not believe that you take everything down because of whatever. But I do believe, tell the story, man. And don't let them get away with it when you say something bad. Because that's what the past few years in the culture has done, is everyone feels this, like it's okay to say the horrible thing. It's not. And you got to use your voice and say enough.
So when someone picks up the book, takes it home and reads it, what is it you want them to take away from that book?
Listen, of course we want them to be entertained and we want them to know, here's what happened and here's a story you never knew. But I don't want to repeat the answer, but I do think it's about, telling people, here's how it happened before. Don't let it happen again. Like, just don't. And that to me is the vital part. And I think, again, I know, there's a great quote that's always attributed to Mark Twain. And even though he truly, there's no proof he ever said it, but it says, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. And boy, do I love that, because history is rhyming right now. And again, like you said, we see what's happening in the news today. And these stories, again, seem oddly familiar. You're constantly seeing people saying those people are the cause of your problem. It's disgusting to me. It's disgusting to me when people do that. Yet it still happens here in 2023. So what do I hope people really take away? Do I want them to be entertained? Sure. Do I want to learn some history? Sure. But I want them to learn to be a better human being to each other. Right? I want them to learn to speak up when they see someone. One of the things we also do is we do a line of kids books, and the newest one is on John Lewis. And John Lewis I've met him, and he's such a nice person, and he was a real supportive of ours. And John Lewis, used to get spit on, and he used to get beaten up, and he used to get bloodied, and he'd still remain completely calm and peaceful. And the number one question people ask John Lewis is, how do you do that? How do you stay calm when people are treating you so poorly? And he said that the secret is his faith. But he used to describe faith as believing in something so deeply, you got to make a way out of no way. Man, I love that, making a way out of no way. So to me, I can't give big speeches. I'm not a politician. I'm not a business person like that. What I know how to do is tell stories. But I'm going to keep telling you stories that show you people making a way out of no way, and hoping that eventually some people who are reading those stories learn it.
The Nazi Conspiracy, The Secret Plot to Kill Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill is the book we're talking about, and our guest is the author, Brad Meltzer. Thank you for being here.
No, I loved it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me? Well, good night. This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.